In 2016, a single article sent shockwaves through the world of military technology. Western analyst Sebastian Roblin published a report that left NATO generals in a heavy, oppressive silence. His words instantly went viral across the globe's largest publications. A full salvo from this Russian machine can incinerate 8 city blocks. Among all ground-based weapons systems, it's hard to find anything more terrifying. But this wasn't just a journalist chasing a headline. He was describing a reality where nuclear warheads or carpet bombings are no longer necessary to turn a fortified area into a scorched wasteland. He was talking about the TOS-1A Solntsepyok, the only combat vehicle in the world capable of wiping out everything in an area the size of 6 football fields in less than 10 seconds. Today, the Solntsepyok is officially recognized as the most fearsome non-nuclear weapon ever created. But why is it impossible to hide from, even in the deepest bunker? And why does the mere sight of this machine on the horizon force the enemy to abandon their positions? To understand that, we have to look into the epicenter of the blast and break down the physics of vacuum hell. The secret to its devastating effectiveness lies in its 220mm munitions. The system uses 2 types of rockets, but it's their combination that turns the strike zone into a place where the laws of physics work against you. The first type consists of incendiary shells. Upon detonation, they create fire zones with temperatures reaching 3,000 degrees Celsius. In this heat, steel melts, concrete crumbles, and light armored vehicles become molten traps for their crews. However, the true horror that leads Western experts to compare this weapon to scenes from a horror movie comes from the second type, the thermobaric munition. Its operation is a 2-stage process. First, at a low altitude over the target, the rocket disperses a combustible aerosol cloud. For a split second, this mixture behaves like a gas. It doesn't just sit on the ground. It flows into every crack, seeping into bunker embrasures, tank hatches, basements, and winding trenches. Once the cloud has filled the space, a second detonator triggers a volumetric explosion. All oxygen in the impact zone is instantly incinerated, creating an area of critically low pressure, essentially a vacuum. Surrounding air then rushes into this void with a monstrous roar, generating a shock wave so powerful it destroys structures that survive the initial heat. Body armor or standard trenches offer no protection because death doesn't come from the outside. It arrives with the very air the enemy breathes. When the thermobaric cloud detonates, the primary destructive force is not the flame itself, but a catastrophic pressure differential. Physicists call this the negative pressure effect. At the center of the explosion, the temperature instantly spikes to several thousand degrees, consuming all available oxygen. Within milliseconds, a zone of rarefied air, a partial vacuum, is formed. In that same second, the surrounding atmosphere rushes toward the epicenter at supersonic speeds to fill the void, creating a reverse shockwave. For those caught in the impact zone, this results in a double blow. First, massive overpressure crushes everything from the outside, and then the sudden pressure drop literally ruptures internal organs, lungs, and blood vessels. This specific physical process makes the Solntsepyok the ideal tool for clearing urban blocks and complex fortifications. Unlike a standard artillery shell, which spends its energy shattering concrete and dispersing shrapnel, the shockwave from this system is plastic. It flows around corners and seeps into ventilation shafts and deep tunnels. Where a classic howitzer is ineffective, the Solntsepyok turns an enclosed space into a torture chamber from which there is no escape. A single 10-second volley blankets an area equivalent to 6 football fields. After such an impact, nothing remains to offer resistance. This is not just artillery. It is a tool for the total dismantling of any defense. But to create such a machine, Soviet engineers had to solve an impossible dilemma: how to bring a flamethrower system within direct line of sight without letting it be destroyed in the first seconds of battle. In the early 1970s, Soviet military leadership recognized a dangerous gap in breakthrough tactics. Existing multiple launch rocket systems, such as the Grad or Urigan, were excellent for area strikes from dozens of kilometers away. But when it came to storming fortified areas, bunkers, and extensive underground communications, the artillery proved too cumbersome and imprecise. Generals required a fundamentally new weapon, an assault flamethrower that could operate not from the rear but on the front line of attack, side by side with main battle tanks. The task seemed paradoxical: a vehicle carrying a massive supply of fuel and explosives had to be brought within direct visibility, just a couple of kilometers from the enemy. This meant that wheeled chassis or the light armor of an APC would not work. Any stray bullet or fragment would turn such a vehicle into a giant torch before it could even fire. Designers were challenged to create a monster with the destructive power of a Grad, but protected as well as a heavy tank. It was then that the design bureau of the Omsk Transport Engineering Plant conceived the idea that would later change the face of local conflicts. They decided to use the chassis of the most mass-produced and reliable tank of the time, the T-72. Only the steel hull of a main battle tank could ensure crew survival under heavy enemy fire. Thus began the history of the system that remained one of the most closely guarded secrets of the Soviet military-industrial complex for a long time, known by the code name Object 634. Choosing a tank chassis was not a mere whim, but a strict necessity. Unlike classic rocket launchers that fire from the deep rear using high trajectories, the future Buratino had to engage in direct fire. This meant the vehicle would inevitably face return fire from artillery, tanks, and anti-tank systems. Engineers used the base of the T-72, the most reliable and protected tank of its time. They removed the turret and gun, replacing them with a massive rotating platform carrying a block of 30 rocket launch tubes. The weight of this construction combined with the ammunition was colossal, and only a tank engine with hundreds of horsepower could provide the necessary maneuverability. However, a serious technical problem arose: the immense recoil during a salvo. To keep the multi-ton machine from rocking like a boat in a storm, designers developed a unique system of hydraulic stabilizers and outriggers that literally pinned the tank to the ground during firing. The crew was reduced to 3 people, positioned inside the armored hull. While they were protected by multi-layered steel, the launcher itself remained a vulnerable point. A single lucky hit to the rocket pack could cause a detonation, leaving no chance for the vehicle or those nearby. This engineering dilemma, how to protect the explosive head of the system, would become key to its further evolution. But before becoming perfect, Buratino had to pass through the hell of a real war. The system received its unusual and even ironic name, Buratino, because of its distinctive appearance. The long nose cones of the rockets protruding from the launchers resembled the nose of the famous fairy tale character. Yet behind this innocent nickname lay one of the Soviet Union's most closely guarded secrets. For a long time, Western intelligence remained baffled. Satellite imagery captured strange hybrids, a T-72 tank chassis with a disproportionately large and angular turret. NATO analysts put forward various theories, ranging from mobile bridges to smokescreen launchers. No one could have guessed that the USSR had created pocket artillery for scorching the front line via direct fire. The internal components were equally secret. The 3-man crew worked with an automated fire control system that allowed them to fire without leaving the safety of the armor. A laser rangefinder and ballistic computer calculated trajectories with surgical precision, which was critical when operating at short ranges. Buratino featured a 30-barrel pack. It was a true steel hedgehog, capable of launching its entire ammunition load in just 15 seconds. Although the first prototypes were ready in the late 70s, the system was hidden from the public for nearly a decade. The wooden boy would have to prove its power not at parades, but in the scorched canyons of Afghanistan, where conventional methods of war had reached a dead end. December 1988 became a turning point in the biography of Buratino. Under strict secrecy, 2 TOS-1 units were deployed to Afghanistan. Soviet command took this step due to a stalemate in the mountains, where Mujahideen had created true underground fortresses in the rock massifs. Conventional artillery was powerless against caves reaching deep into the ridges, and aerial bombs often missed the narrow crevices. The first deployment of the system took place during Operation Typhoon. The targets were fortified positions in the Kunduz province. When the units moved into position and fired their first salvo, the effect exceeded all military expectations. The thermobaric composition of the rockets didn't just strike the cave entrances. The aerosol cloud flowed deep into the tunnels, turning underground shelters into fiery traps. After the strike, a dead silence hung over the mountains. According to eyewitnesses, those within the blast radius didn't even have time to realize what had happened. Buratino completed a task that previously required weeks of grueling assaults and massive infantry losses in just a few seconds. It was a triumphant debut that forever changed the tactics of fighting guerrilla groups in mountainous terrain. The weapon proved to be the ideal incinerator of hidden threats, but this first success also revealed deadly design flaws. In Kunduz, Buratino faced the toughest challenge of that war. The Mujahideen held canyons turned into labyrinths where every bend in the rock served as a natural shield against shrapnel. However, the thermobaric effect neutralized all the advantages of the mountain landscape. Eyewitnesses described it as something supernatural. After the salvo, a cloud rose above the mountains, which a moment later turned into a blinding flash, sucking the life out of all nearby caves. The main discovery of the Kunduz operation was that Buratino didn't just destroy manpower. It completely paralyzed the will of those outside the immediate impact zone. The terrifying roar, deafening even at a distance of several kilometers, and the sight of entire fortifications instantly evaporating, demoralized the enemy more than any airstrikes. Command realized they had more than just a flamethrower. They had a powerful tool of psychological warfare. However, behind this triumph lay a dangerous vulnerability. The work in Kunduz confirmed the engineer's theory. Due to the short firing range of only 3 to 4 kilometers, the vehicle was forced to approach the enemy almost point blank. In mountain conditions, this made the TOS an ideal target for RPG ambushes. It became clear that the first version was merely a draft, and the system required a radical modernization that would later lead to the creation of the legendary Solntsepyok. Despite its colossal power, the first combat tests revealed the system's Achilles heel. The problem lay in a paradox. Buratino had tank armor on its lower hull, but its head, the launcher, was extremely poorly protected. The launch tube walls were thin, capable of stopping only small fragments. With a firing range of only 3.5 kilometers, the vehicle was within reach not only of anti-tank guided missiles, but also ordinary heavy machine guns. Any lucky hit on the pack of 30 thermobaric rockets turned the unit into a volumetric bomb weighing several tons. The crew was essentially sitting on a powder keg that could detonate from a single accurate sniper burst or a lucky grenade toss. Furthermore, the lack of modern night vision systems and thermal imagers at the time made the vehicle helpless at twilight. Buratino was a fearsome but extremely vulnerable predator that had to get close to its victim, exposing its most sensitive organ, the ammunition load, to attack. These bitter lessons from Afghanistan and later the First Chechen campaign forced designers to face a choice: either scrap the system or radically rethink its survivability. This crisis led to the deep modernization that gave birth to the legendary TOS-1, a Solntsepyok. In 2001, the Russian army officially adopted a deeply modernized version of the system, receiving the name the whole world knows today, the TOS-1, a Solntsepyok. Designers carried out a massive overhaul, turning the experimental Buratino into the perfect tool for modern warfare. The primary change was a radical redesign of the launcher. To increase the vehicle's survivability on the battlefield, engineers made a deliberate compromise. The number of rocket tubes was reduced from 30 to 24. The saved weight allowed the rocket pack to be encased in full bulletproof and fragment-proof armor. Now, a stray machine gun hit or a nearby mortar blast would not lead to an instant catastrophe. But the Solntsepyok didn't just become better protected. Its reach grew much longer. Thanks to new rocket fuel formulations and changes in the weight of the munitions, the maximum firing range was increased to 6 kilometers. This was a critical qualitative leap. Now the vehicle could strike targets while staying outside the effective range of most man-portable anti-tank systems of that era. Additionally, the Solntsepyok received an updated fire control system. The ballistic computer now accounted for air temperature and wind direction in real time, allowing the thermobaric cloud to hit the target accurately with the very first shot. The vehicle stopped being just a flamethrower on tracks. It turned into a high-precision assault instrument, ready for the most complex conflicts of the 21st century. Modernization to the Solntsepyok level would have been incomplete without a radical upgrade of the vehicle's vision. While the old Buratino relied heavily on the crew's eye and luck, the TOS-1A received a full digital targeting complex. The vehicle is now equipped with a laser rangefinder accurate to within a few meters and modern ballistic computers. But the main innovation is the integration of thermal imaging channels. Now, the Solntsepyok doesn't just fire in the enemy's direction. It sees the thermal signatures of targets through smoke, dust, and dense fog. This turned the system into a night hunter. When the enemy counts on the cover of darkness for stealth, the Solntsepyok strikes with surgical precision. Increasing the range to 6 kilometers allowed for a new tactical scheme. The unit no longer needs to drive directly into the line of sight of RPG gunners. It can operate from the second line, using terrain or buildings for cover. At the same time, the accuracy remains phenomenal. The automation itself factors in the vehicle's tilt, atmospheric pressure, and even wind speed. These long arms combined with new eyes made the Solntsepyok practically invulnerable to infantry return fire, transforming it from a support tool into an independent force capable of deciding the outcome of a battle single-handedly. Experience from local conflicts in Chechnya and Syria turned the Solntsepyok into the ultimate argument when storming fortified cities. In dense urban environments, conventional artillery is often ineffective. Shells ricochet off walls or explode on upper floors without harming those sheltered in basements. But for a thermobaric cloud, concrete walls are no barrier. The Solntsepyok operates on the principle of incinerating pockets of resistance. If a high-rise building is turned into a fortress with firing points in every apartment, a single accurate salvo from the TOS-1A solves the entire problem. The gaseous mixture flows into window openings, ventilation shafts, and door cracks, after which a volumetric explosion instantly collapses internal floors, turning the fortification into a concrete tomb. However, such power requires masterful tactics. Despite its reinforced armor, the Solntsepyok remains priority target number one on narrow city streets. The enemy throws everything they have into destroying the unit, knowing that its salvo means the end of their defense. Therefore, in Syria and other hotspots, the tank shield doctrine was perfected. The unit never goes in alone. It is always covered by one or two T-72 or T-90 tanks that suppress enemy firing points, while the Solntsepyok deploys its launcher. This combination of heavy armor and incinerating power made assault groups practically unstoppable, allowing them to breach even the most echeloned defensive lines. The Syrian campaign became the toughest endurance test for the Solntsepyok. Here, the system had to operate in extreme temperatures, reaching 50 degrees Celsius, and endless abrasive dust that instantly disables delicate electronics. But the Solntsepyok, built on the base of the indestructible T-72, withstood even this. In Syria, the Russian military faced the tactics of tunnel warfare. For years, insurgents built extensive networks, turning entire cities into underground hives. Aviation was often powerless as bombs exploded on the surface, only slightly shaking the concrete structures deep below. But the arrival of the TOS-1A changed the rules of the game. The uniqueness of a thermobaric strike is that overpressure spreads through tunnels like blood through veins. The gas cloud penetrates ventilation shafts and emergency exits. The subsequent detonation caused underground communications to simply collapse, while those inside died instantly from barotrauma. A unique fact was recorded in Syria. Over years of active combat, not a single confirmed loss of a vehicle to enemy fire was reported. This became the best proof of the heavy armor concept. The Solntsepyok proved it is not just a weapon of intimidation, but a reliable workhorse capable of operating where any other equipment fails in the face of heat and fanatical resistance. But while the tracked monster was scorching deserts, a new revolution was already being prepared in Russian factories, the wheeled Tosochka. While the Solntsepyok continued to dominate the battlefield, Russian engineers realized that modern warfare requires even greater flexibility. This led to the Tosochka, or TOS-2, a system that marked a transition to a completely new philosophy of heavy flamethrowers. The most visible difference is the shift from heavy tank tracks to the wheeled chassis of a 3-axle Ural truck with enhanced off-road capability. Why swap proven tank armor for wheels? The answer is mobility. In modern conflicts, the speed of moving troops along public roads is often more important than the ability to push through forest debris. The Tosochka can perform 100-mile marches on its own without needing special trailers or platforms. It appears where it isn't expected, strikes and vanishes before the enemy can launch drones or start counter-battery fire. But wheels aren't the only innovation. The TOS-2 eliminated its main logistical burden. Previously, reloading a Buratino or Solntsepyok required a separate transport loading vehicle with a crane. The Tosochka features its own built-in manipulator. Now the crew can replenish ammunition independently in an open field, making the unit a fully autonomous combat cell. Protection hasn't disappeared. The Ural cabin is deeply armored against bullets, shrapnel, and even weapons of mass destruction. Increased range with new rockets allows the TOS-2 to operate from the deep rear, turning it into a sniper rocket system. It is no longer just an assault vehicle, but an intelligent hunter that has absorbed the experience of all previous generations. The history of heavy flamethrower systems is a 40-year journey from the secret Soviet Buratino to the digital Tosochka. In this story, there is one striking fact that baffles military analysts worldwide. For 4 decades, Russia has remained the only country that managed not only to create, but to bring such a class of weapon to mass production. No army on the planet, including Western technological giants, has a direct equivalent to the Solntsepyok in its arsenal. There were attempts to copy it, with prototypes and high-profile concepts created, but none went beyond the testing grounds. The reason is simple. Creating a thermobaric munition of such power and combining it with a heavily armored, high-speed chassis is a complex engineering task requiring a unique scientific school. Today, Russian chemical, biological, and radiological defense troops possess 3 generations of systems that complement each other perfectly. The heavy-tracked Solntsepyok is indispensable for breaking through defenses under heavy fire while working alongside tanks. Meanwhile, the mobile Tosochka handles the task of rapidly scorching targets deep within the front line. Over 40 years, targeting systems have changed, and range and accuracy have increased. But one thing remains constant. Every appearance of these machines on the horizon ends the same way. Enemy territory turns into a scorched void, where resistance becomes physically impossible. In the world of modern weapons, there are many legends, but the Solntsepyok is a reality where an enemy caught in the blast zone simply has no chance for a tomorrow.